Sweet. So thank you all for coming out tonight to celebrate the release of Atomic Family with us. When we opened Zeppelin, we opened it with the goal of wanting to give MFA students at UCF and alumni like a venue to share their work with the greater Orlando. So I want to say thank you, Ciera, for letting us make this dream happen. This has been awesome. Yeah, I was gonna say you guys can clap. Now I'd like to invite Jamie Poissant up to help us kick things off. David James Poissant is the author of The Heaven of Animals, a finalist for the LA Times Book Prize, and Lake Life, a New York Times Editor's Choice selection in print in 7 languages. He teaches in the MFA program at UCF and lives in Oviedo with his wife and daughters. Give it up for Jamie.
Good evening. Can everyone hear me okay? Wonderful. Where's your... there she is. All right. Good evening. It's my profound honor to introduce Ciera McElroy tonight. Ciera was my workshop student and my thesis student in the MFA program at UCF. And I was also her observer in the GTA program, which means that for 2 years straight, we saw an awful lot of each other. Probably too much. By the end of our time together, she was probably sick of me, probably tired of my war on vague pronouns and my demand for concrete imagery and sensory details in everything I read. But I never got tired of working with Ciera. Whether she was leading a lecture on dialogue with clips from Aaron Sorkin movies or taking notes at a wobbly Starbucks table while we discussed the riches of Ethan Frome, Ciera was hands down one of the finest students and writers it has ever been my pleasure to work with in 15 years of teaching at the college level. Now, Ciera, if you know her, this won't come as a shock to you, was not your average student. She's not your average writer. She's not really your average person. She's the rare kind of emerging writer who arrives to a graduate program nearly fully formed already, so well read and with such a respect for writing at the sentence level that as a professor, you don't quite know how to guide her. I often found it best to just get out of her way and let her write. But to say that she needed little help diminishes how hard she worked with what little help I had to give. Ciera, ever a quick study, never hesitated to make changes, to take advice, to apply craft lessons, and revise with a maniacal zeal that is rare in young writers and necessary. It's often said that the writers who make it aren't the most talented. They're the ones who stick with it, who revise, who work the hardest. I suppose this is true of any discipline, that hard work is rewarded more than raw talent. And as someone who comes from a blue-collar background, I subscribe to this philosophy. Forget inspiration, forget the muse. Some days the muse doesn't show up, but the difference between a real writer and a wannabe writer is that the real writer works and writes and revises and writes and revises again without excuses, inspiration or not. And Ciera is a real writer. She's the real deal. But infuriatingly, she's not just the hardest worker. She also somehow has the most natural talent. It's actually really unfair. As Nick Carraway says in The Great Gatsby, the fundamental decencies are parceled out unequally at birth. I don't know if that's true, but I know for sure that the fundamentals of writing are parceled out unequally. And somehow Ciera got 2 writers' shares. Somehow she's both the writer with talent to burn and the writer with a profound and professional work ethic. And her new book, her first published book, the novel Atomic Family, proves this. I wish I could say that I taught Ciera everything she knows, but that would be a lie. If nothing else, I'm simply proud to say that I didn't hold her back, and I'm prouder of that than I know how to admit. I'm very proud of you, Ciera, and very happy. This is a special night, so welcome to your book launch and welcome home. Thank you.
Well, now I'm emotional. Oh, Jamie, thank you so much for those kind words. I feel undeserving of them, and I do want to say to everyone here that Jamie's novel, Lake Life, is amazing, and I highly recommend that you go check it out and read it as well. I want to thank everyone for being here tonight. You are making my lifelong dream come true. And someone recently laughed at me when I said lifelong because I'm in my 20s. You can still have a lifelong dream come true when you're in your 20s. I truly have wanted and looked forward to this since I was a young child. There are some people that I want to thank tonight before we really get into the reading. I'd like to start off by thanking Alex and Andrea for hosting this book launch event here at this beautiful bookstore. Isn't it beautiful, everyone? I'd also like to thank the fellow writers from my MFA program at the University of Central Florida. Several of them are here tonight, and many of them gave notes on this book in its very early stages while we were in a novel workshop with Dr. Brenda Paynato, and that workshop changed my life because we had to complete a novel in a semester, and I did it, and then was able to revise it and fix it and rework it after graduation into what you all now have in your hands tonight. Everyone says about publishing, and really, honestly, about anything, that it takes a village. That is completely true. I had no idea how many people it took to get a book out in the world, not just the writer and the agent and the editors, but the cover designers and the publicists and everyone who has worked so hard to get this book out here tonight. So I just want to say thank you to my team at Blair and everyone who has made this possible. And of course, I want to thank my parents who read all of the manuscripts that, thank goodness, will never be books because I wrote them when I was 11, 12, and up. They are terrible, and they will remain in hidden closets forever. But in particular, I want to thank someone who I never met, someone whose life and work directly impacted this book and the source material in it. My grandfather, Henry, was a nuclear scientist at a top-secret hydrogen bomb plant in small-town South Carolina in the 1960s. It was the kind of job that you could not talk about at home, not only because it was dangerous, but because it could get you labeled a traitor, a communist. The stakes were very high. And I grew up hearing stories about the Cold War from my father, who lived through the duck and cover drills of the era, many of which you'll read about in the book. And I grew up hearing about the Savannah River plant, which was the site where my grandfather worked. This plant worked at creating and developing products for the hydrogen bomb, and this plant was hidden just out of sight from a charming small southern town, and it created this eerie atmosphere, knowing that something so dangerous was hidden just out of sight. My father would tell me about how his friends, when he was growing up, had bomb shelters, as if it was just commonplace to have a fallout shelter in case you might die, and this was just part of the fabric of life there. Children had drills in schools. Parents, and teachers would prepare them what to do in case a bomb came, and you were basically preparing to die at school, and what to do to keep yourself safe should a nuclear bomb be dropped on your town. In my father's stories, there was more, though. There was a mother figure that was not very mothering, a woman who was caught in her husband's shadow and took to drinking herself, basically to distract herself. My father told me of one particular time in his childhood when he snuck through the house and threw away and poured out the liquor bottles that his mother had hidden, hoping that he would not find them. But of course, he did find them, and he took it upon himself to be like an adult and deal with it, even though he was a little boy. That was the first image that really stuck in my mind when I started to write what would eventually become Atomic Family, even though that particular part of the story ended up getting edited out. But I used it as part of my MFA application when I was first working through these characters as part of short stories instead of a novel. In the short stories, as I was playing with this plot and these characters, at the time we moved through generations and followed the characters at different times in their lives in different eras. And my favorite story from the early collection was actually set in the 50s, and it had a father figure and his little boy building a fallout shelter together. And the little boy asks his father, "Do you think that a bomb will come?" And the father says, "No, probably not." And then the little boy says, "But will this keep us safe if one does come?" which is a tricky question if you are a scientist who knows the answer, right? This is really all a big PR campaign to make you feel safe instead of actually keeping you safe, because sometimes feeling safe was more important when that was all that you could give to your child. And this moment is what made me realize this is really what the book is about. And so in the MFA, when I started to turn it into a novel, that is what I followed. The desire and pressure of a parent trying to keep your child safe in a world that is inherently dangerous. And what do you do with that? What do you tell them? And how do you try to make their world as safe as possible? So that is where I began when actually turning this into a novel. And I'm thrilled to be reading from it tonight. For all of you who have your book already, we are going to be reading a few pages from chapter 1, so you're welcome to read along with me. And then after, we will have just a very brief Q&A, so if you do have any questions about the research process, about writing, publishing, anything, I'm happy to take some of those as well before we move to the signing. So we are starting on page 5 with the top of Nellie's chapter. The party is not going well. For one thing, Dean is late, and most of the guests are his friends, not Nellie's. Half the time, she opens the door and blanks on the person's name as they bustle past, carrying dishes wrapped in aluminum. They are co-workers, mostly, and plant wives. They are, quite frankly, friends of convenience. Not to mention, no one seems much in a Halloween mood. Not with the news this morning spoke of a real terror, the stuff of nightmares. The Soviets launched a test bomb in the Arctic, 1,500 times more powerful than Fat Man and Little Boy. Nellie had no conception for destruction like that, could not imagine 1,500 Hiroshimas. Still, the party guests come with their spooky dishes to share. The house is overwarm and overcrowded. Orange light slices through the Venetian blinds and catches the dust particles dancing in the air. Nellie plays hostess like it's a game. She throws candy at the trick-or-treaters and suffers through small talk about that Catholic in the White House. She keeps the radio on rockabilly and even compliments Frumpy Harriet's checker print dress. She is trying her best. She really is. But she nurses a laundry list of complaints, not the least of which is that Dean is late when this was his idea to begin with. There are not enough wine glasses, not enough chairs, the ice is all melting and they've run out of tea. Dean gave her a tiny, shameful budget, so she had to ask guests to contribute food. How her mother would be mortified. Plus, the house is really too small for anyone but 3, 900 square feet of wallpaper and wood decorated with secondhand furniture. Good bones, Dean said when they moved years ago, but she hated this image. So skeletal, so ghastly. Nellie stops by the crowded couch, watches Frank Tuckerman and Sander Preston deal a game of rummy. Alan Conway, a squat man, soft in the stomach but a loud type, pokes through the bookshelf, brighter than 1,000 suns, physics and human knowledge. Hal Sorensen, Dean's boss, examines the cuckoo collection over the mantel, and there by the potluck table is Wilson's teacher. Nellie always forgets her name. Patricia, Pamela, Peggy, best not to guess and be wrong, and Nellie doesn't remember inviting her. But here she is with her husband, who runs the Civil Defense Agency. Nellie only remembers this because he phoned last spring to say that Wilson cycled over alone with questions about fallout. And was she aware of this? She said, yes, of course, because any other answer would admit a sort of negligence. She rarely knows where Wilson is. The men cheer as Frank Tuckerman plays a winning pair. All day there has been this, the manic rush before the storm of a party. She walked to the grocery store and carried the bags back herself. She dragged an ammonia-dipped rag along the floor. Of course, she consulted her Bible, the Sears catalog, for inspiration, trying to make their Halloween potluck as posh as humanly possible. Still, as she arranged breadsticks or wizard wands, she couldn't help but feel shallow for caring about a party, especially when with the news on the radio. The Soviets have launched the largest hydrogen test bomb in the nuclear age. Already they are calling it Tsar Bomba. Is it wrong that she worries about having placemats that match? that she cringes at the sight of a card table in the makeshift living room space. She wants cocktails in glass. She wants wedding china on arranged runners, table settings with hand-tipped name cards, not borrowed bowls with foil. Her work seems of little consequence beside the hefty weight of Dean's research at the plant. Years from now, scholars and students will remember his name, his contributions. He could win awards, the Nobel. He could have his name on a plaque. But her light will fade like dying stars. No one would remember a failed party. Everyone would remember a failed bomb. It is 6:45, time for a cigarette. Nellie squeezes past two crew-cut men in a quarrel about Checkpoint Charlie. We were this close to another goddamn fight in Germany. This is not proper party discussion. Then again, how can anyone think of anything else these days? The world has gone mad. Sometimes it seems like the war never ended, only evolved into something dark and thick like molasses, something impossible to swallow. At the coat rack, Nellie fumbles through her purse for a cigarette. She finds one just as the doorbell chimes. When she swings the door open, a flush of cool air enters the house. A girl stands on the steps, no older than 6, wearing a tubular black dress and wide-brimmed hat. She is pale with cinnamon freckles. Pearls collar her neck. And what are you, little pumpkin, says Nellie, cigarette between her teeth. She stoops for the candy bowl. I'm not a pumpkin, says the girl. I'm Holly Golightly. With the child's lisp, Nellie hears Go Like Me. That movie. Nellie saw the film at the cinema, and immediately it struck something deep and long buried inside her. There was a wistfulness she recognized. She saw Audrey Hepburn outside Tiffany's with her Danish, always looking in on a private, secret world, never able to enter, never quite there. And she thought, yes, that is exactly what it's like. Caramel or chocolate, says Nellie. Before the child can answer, Nellie drops a caramel in the pail. What mother lets her child see breakfast at Tiffany's anyway? That's what she wants to know. She watches the girl retreat to the sidewalk, but instead of returning to her guests, Nellie follows and closes the door behind her. The sun is warm as it sinks behind the trees, but the air is cool. Around her, the neighborhood seethes with life and color. Jack-o'-lanterns grin with candlelit eyes, and the trees gleam with autumn gold. Their street is lined with station wagons parked one behind the other, like a row of Wilson's matchbox cars. Children flit in small bands from house to house, clad in ghost sheets and witch hats. Their laughter is a staccato pitch through the air, headache-inducing. She remembers her cigarette, lights it, and sighs. The Soviets have launched the largest bomb in history the day before her party. The Soviets have upped the ante. Dean is late. It wasn't just the test bomb that cast a pall over the party. Ever since they arrived with their costumed children and covered plates, the wives stayed clustered by the sink. They busied themselves by opening cans of fruit cocktail or refilling the ice, but they spoke in charged whispers out of the men's earshot. When Nellie entered the kitchen to check on the food, she caught the furtive note in their voice. The tension was thick and palpable as pudding. I've got to bring her with me, Bev said. A baby jiggled on her hip, all rolls. Got no other option. Don't worry about that, it's a good thing. Myra said bring the kids, said Harriet, a small and birdish woman. She poured a glass of wine and sipped it gingerly. Babies in the stroller is half the image. It softens it, I think. The women smiled shyly at Nellie as though surprised to see her in her own home. What? She asked. Lois Shepherd leaned against the counter and sipped a beer. Her cheekbones looked severe under the harsh kitchen light, like rivets in marble. She nodded at the other women as if to say, It's fine. I take it you know about tomorrow, she said with significance. When Nellie just blinked, Lois prodded, The rally? Myra's? Nellie had forgotten all about it. Sure, she received the bulletin in the mail. Are our children in danger? Join the march. Strike for peace. It went straight in the trash. She is not the political type. When she votes like Dean. But then somehow she ended up on a call list. Myra Sorensen phoned out of the clear blue asking if she knew about the contamination levels in cow's milk, the danger to children's health, the risk of ingesting strontium-90. She asked if Nellie would attend an anti-nuclear march. This was a month ago, and Nellie listened, dazed from a morning nap, as Myra went on about disarmament and test bans and decontamination. If you care about these issues at all, you should join us. It's especially important for women like you to be there, said Myra. And as that conversation surfaced in Nellie's memory, it dawned on her what that meant. Wives of the atomic men. It seemed obvious to Nellie that they were not protesting the hydrogen bomb in some moral abstract, but the nuclear plant where their husbands worked, the lifeblood of this town. Easy enough for Myra. She was a scholar, a former suffragette, a born activist. She lived in Los Alamos during the Manhattan Project, and rumor was, had witnessed that very first bomb as it shuddered over the desert. She became newly incensed about a test ban after Bertrand Russell was arrested for an anti-nuclear demonstration in Trafalgar Square. But no, Nellie would not join. Dean would be furious in his simmering way, and she didn't need more trouble with him. Besides, she had no interest in being branded unpatriotic. I got the flyers, Nellie said simply. She tried to busy herself with rearranging the tray of jalapeno mummies wrapped in rolls. Do the men know about this? Nellie glanced at Bev. Her husband, Alan, had a reputation for being volatile. She'd seen him angry before, roused over sporting events of all things, and his face turned a bruised pink as though punched from the inside. The wives exchanged glances as Bev reddened and shook her head. Not yet, anyway, she said. Well, good luck with all that. But aren't you worried even a little? I mean, they're calling in people for less all the time, holding them up for questioning. Lois looked resigned, as though Nellie was a lost cause. That's just the beauty of it, Lois shrugged. No one cares what housewives do. It's not that, said Bev, because if they don't care, then what's the point? The point is, who wants to arrest some sweet little mother with her baby carriage, said Harriet. It's bad publicity. Bottom line, they've got more important fish to fry than women like us. Honestly, the only reason I'm going is because it gave me a panic learning about the milk. Bev pinched her baby's cheek. Strontium-90 can cause leukemia, they say. Now, don't quote me on this, but how I understand it is the fallout gets on the grass, then into the cow, then into the milk, just as simple as that. I refuse to buy milk anymore. Wilson took milk in his cereal that morning. Nellie poured it herself. Anyway, tomorrow's bigger than any one town, said Lois, straightening. Myra's just our local organizer. This whole thing was put together by that illustrator, what's her name, wrote The House That Jack Built. You'd recognize it, I'm sure. But tomorrow's bigger than all of us, so there's safety in numbers. There will be marches all over the country. L.A., New York, Washington. Nellie considered this. Women with baby carriages leaving their jobs and aprons, leaving to march in the street tomorrow at 10. A gathering of women dialed through phone books and Christmas lists and Rotary clubs and garden clubs and cross-stitch guilds, a secret network of women and their clubs protesting radioactive milk. But there was more. According to Lois, the local dentist had started collecting baby teeth. She'd taken in her daughter Penny for a cleaning when Dr. Henton noticed a loose molar. He said to phone when it fell out. He said he needed donations. He's been asking everyone, said Lois. Here, Lois finished her beer and dropped the bottle with a clink into the trash. Donating them where? Bev's baby, barely 6 months old, still dewy, gummed her fist. To the plant. For research. This has grated at Nellie since she excused herself from the conversation. As she moved to the refrigerator and retrieved the remaining deviled eggs, she thought of the smoke, or was it steam, that always coiled above the canopies of kudzu and Spanish moss in this town. What had kept Dean today? She imagined him in a white coat, holding baby teeth to fluorescent bulbs in a sterile laboratory, kept late today of all days, the night of grim news, the night of the party. 1,500 times larger than Hiroshima, the news said. Nellie ran a fingernail through one of the whipped yolks and licked it clean. The paprika was tart on her tongue. The women's words replayed through her mind. Baby teeth. What could the plant possibly need with baby teeth? She has been to the Sterling Creek plant perimeter only twice. dropping off Dean when a ride fell through. The woods are thick there outside town. From the checkpoint, she could see nothing but the rounded curve of country highway that vanished between the boughs. She will never forget how Dean clipped the clearance badge to his blazer and closed the passenger door. A guard in military gray opened the gate as Dean walked alone down the thruway, hands firmly in his coat. She thought fleetingly, childishly, of trying to follow, pushing her car through the rail just to see what was there. But she simply turned around and left, Dean in her rear view mirror. The plant has always been more than a physical barrier. It is the fourth member of their family, a silent and dangerous presence. It is the horror that haunts the town. When they first moved to Oakley, Nellie pressed Dean for answers. Your PhD is in dirt. Why do they need a soil scientist to study bombs? He gave a sardonic smile. Who said, I study bombs? Thank you. Thank you all for letting me read from chapter 1. I'd love to have a conversation if anyone has any questions about the book or about the writing process. And if not, that's fine too. Yes. As a novel, I finished it in 2019, so several years. Part of that is because of COVID. We went out on submission for the first time in March of 2020, which turned out to be awesome timing, and we had to basically withdraw from submission for a year. So kind of put things on hold, but then when we went back out, we sold it pretty quickly. So COVID was definitely a wrench in that, but it is a many years long process to go from drafting to publication and then launch events like this. Mm-hmm. That's a great question. So it was, what does your research process look like for this book? Well, I'll say off the top of the bat that I am not a nuclear physicist. So it was a lot. The first thing that I did that was my in-depth process was I actually did tour the bomb plant where my grandfather worked. It's now decommissioned, and they're focused on environmental cleanup, which, if you read the book, becomes a very important theme. And I got to see it for myself, at least what they showed us, and visualizing it and seeing the town that this is based on, a fictionalized version, was very important. The other thing I did, though, because I struggled with how to write Dean's perspective, we do end up getting to go behind the scenes in the bomb plant and follow his point of view. I had to make sure I really knew enough to give him enough to really talk about that would feel valid for his level of education. And so I actually studied my grandfather's articles that are now public. They have been declassified, they're online. That was really cool. So I got to see exactly the type of work that was happening at this plant at the time. And I based a lot of the conversations that Dean has at work on that. So that was really not only personal and special for me, but gave me a unique insight into the Cold War, because there are not a lot of Cold War books about the domestic reality, right? Most of them are about spies or the space race or those big flashy things, and I wanted to write about ordinary people. So yeah, going to the plant in person and finding some first-hand accounts was really helpful. Mm-hmm.
What kind of stories did you hear from your parents growing up about your grandfather?
Oh, so many. My father would talk about music. He was an interesting person in that he did not come across like a academic snob. You would not know from talking with him that he was this incredibly prestigious scientist. He was simple, ordinary. He would play his mandolin with a little country band, and that's something I really have loved hearing about him. What has been cool is that now that we're sharing, press about the book, is that people who knew him as either children or had encountered him along the way have come out and started sharing stories about him because they get the connection, they know who it's about, and they talk about how he helped me fix my bicycle or just things like that. And as I never knew him, that's really special to hear about, and I love that really down-to-earth quality that I hope comes through in the fictionalized version of him. It's a great question. Yeah.
How did you go about choosing the title?
Yes. The question was, how did you pick the title? The title was originally different, and we had to change it actually last minute. Well, not last minute, like within a year, because there was another book coming out with the title. So that was difficult, and that happens in the literary world when people have the same titles. But we wanted something that would speak to the fact that it is about a family. So this is not just one perspective. We have Nellie's voice. We also have Wilson, who's my personal favorite, and then we have Dean, the father. And so we wanted it to be clear that it's about the family unit. All of their voices are equally important to the book. It's not like one is correct or one has the right perspective. You really need all three. And so that's why we wanted to emphasize like the family unit. Yep. Mm-hmm. Oh my goodness. Why is Wilson my favorite character? So when you guys read it, you'll see Wilson is very obsessed with the civil defense measures in the town. So he takes everything very seriously. When the government propaganda from the Cold War is telling children, you must be prepared for war to come at any time, he takes that 1,000% seriously, and he's trying to prepare for war. He's 10 years old. He's turned their fallout shelter into a clubhouse to basically have like boot camp, and it's terrifying but so believable to me that a child would latch on and take it at face value. And I think it speaks to the way that children absorb media, propaganda, themes of war. They pick up on these things, even if we hope that they won't. And I just found his voice really fun because it's very extreme. When you're writing about a child closely in the child's perspective, having that obsessive of a voice really allows you to explore their climate and also what they've been told to believe. And I just found that really enjoyable. We can take maybe one more question. Yeah. Yeah, that's hard. I think the first thing I did, and I hope my parents agree, is that I asked permission, right? Like, this is not my story. I did not live through the duck and cover drills. And because it was going to be obvious eventually that this is based on, like, loosely based on someone who was real, I wanted to make sure that my father would not be upset or offended. And I think the other thing is that it is a novel. So like there's a grain of truth there, and the facts of a lot of the research that Dean is doing is real. He's a completely fictional character. And so once I felt like permission to write about it, I also felt permission to completely make it my own, to add character flaws and character traits that I thought would enhance the book. And that adds so many levels of separation. So I kept like the bare minimums of fact. Because you don't want it to feel like it's a caricature of a real person, you know, or stereotyping or anything that can easily happen when you're writing about real people. So that was important for me, permission and then degrees of separation. But it's hard, and it takes lots of drafts for it to feel like your own, because you don't want it to just feel like, you know, someone else's nonfiction. Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. I'm going to have Alex come back up and close us out, and he's going to, he actually has a gift for you guys, and then we're going to transition to the signing.